Hey Tim, good to see you today. I think we are going to talk about the Network Automation Forum's survey that we recently just got. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It was a survey put on by the Network Automation Forum to talk about the state of network automation. And they've been doing this survey now for a few years, and we're going to talk about the key insights. Now, Chris Grundeman presented this at NANOG a couple months ago, and then recently at AutoCon 4. We're going to dive in a little bit more and talk about some other topics that we found interesting that that the data showed.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. And for those of you joining us, my name is Tim.
And I'm Tim.
And we talk about all things related to network automation, the state of the industry, as well as just things that are of interest to us. We hope you enjoy as well, and don't forget to like and subscribe. So we were really interested in this 2025 State of Network Automation survey that we got from the Network Automation Forum. It's very interesting, the results that we saw coming in here. So Tim and I are just going to go through this here with you today and kind of really deep dive into what do these results mean that we're seeing here coming. And thanks very much to Chris for conducting this every year. It's been really interesting trend to see over the last, I believe, 3 years we've been doing this now. So yeah, let's get into it.
Let's start off with the responses. And
this is something we just found fascinating as we looked across this here. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, just the year-over-year growth. I think you were going to talk about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if we look way back when this first started just 2 years ago now in 2023, we had 78 responses, not really that many, and a small amount of growth in 2024, but not much. But then look at what happened in 2025. We went from 106 responses in 2024 to 681 responses in 2025. Just an incredible leap up in this number of responses we're getting. And I think this perfectly aligns with the story that we've been talking about, Tim, and something we saw on the Gartner hype cycle as well, is that network automation has left the hype cycle. It is now mainstream.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's also neat to look at here is the organization types. 14 different organization types responded in 2023, and now we're up to 36 this year. The same thing for job roles. Who is responding also increased more than double over 2023.
Yeah, fascinating year as we see, I would say, real world evidence of what Gartner told us, a few months ago in the hype cycle report. Yeah.
Yep. All right, let's hop on to the next slide of interest here that we're going to dig into a little bit here, and that is slide 22. How automated are we? Tim, you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, look at this, right? This also aligns with what we saw coming out of Gartner. I love it when we get these details from, it's kind of the more professional or academic view, and then we see real world data actually aligning to what they told us, which is that, hey, yes, network automation has left the hype cycle. It has become commonplace, but it is still in the very early days. As we look at this here, we have this massive, kind of hump, if you will, right at basically the very beginning of the idea of automation, where, we're just beginning this concept of automation. We've really just started to scratch the surface of what automation is doing for us.
Yeah, and if you look at, let's say, the leftmost 4 bars here, this sums up, if my math is right, to 53% of the respondents. So 53% of us are 30% or less automated. I'd argue that's progress. What's also interesting, though, is that if you look at the far right, the four rightmost bars, 17% of us are 70% or more automated. So we have 53% of us down on the bottom, 30% or less automated, 70% of us, I'll say, highly automated, over 70%. Really interesting. Shows a lot of room for growth.
Right. And something I want to just kind of tap on here as we look at this, and I think we're gonna see in a few more slides where, how are we automating? And I think what we're going to see is if we were to go talk to some of those folks up at the upper end, I think how they're automating is going to be very different from how the folks at the lower end of this graph are automating. We'll talk about that a little bit in one of the other graphs, but I wanted to just kind of tease that out here, that, this idea of maturity and how that evolves your story around that. How do I automate and what do I automate?
Yep. These folks are doing it different, most likely, than these
Yeah, for
folks.
sure. Yep.
And what are those differences? We're going to dig into that a little bit later on.
Perfect. Yeah, interesting. I mean, again, Chris, thank you so much. This is amazing, really, really interesting data as we go year over year on this now, and I'm really looking forward to the next one. It's going to get even better.
Yep. Yeah, we're hopping down to slide 26 now, Tim. How is automation being used? We have one big use case here that's really sticking out at us. What is that? Want to talk about
Yeah,
that?
so configuration deployment. You couldn't get more basic, right? This is just our basic starting point of like what might I automate? Well, I guess we'll start with configuration deployment, the simplest thing you might automate. And for sure, of those folks there, probably very few, if any, are automating the full configuration deployment. For sure, they're just automating maybe a little bits or pieces here or there. I'm sure if we drilled into that, if we could, we'd probably see some details there where, yeah, I've automated a little bit, not a lot of the config deployment. But we're nowhere near the nirvana of like doing things like, full closed loop automation or reactive services or even network as a service. We're just doing very, very basic network automation to deploy configuration.
Yeah, and this is really foundational. This is the use case that we here at Network to Code often find ourselves helping a lot of our customers with. As first thing is configuration deployment,
Yep.
getting your configuration standardized, and this is foundational because it then provides a more predictable behavior in the rest of the network, a more uniform behavior across the network, more predictability. And that is absolutely essential to build higher level automation, is having a fabric of very predictable device behavior to automate
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Something interesting I see there as well, right? We have this config management over on the left side, but with drift detection. And that's just a very, very small percentage. So if you're doing configuration deployment without drift detection, that's a disaster waiting to happen. Because at some point, you're going to deploy some configuration and there's been some drift from your expected state and things are going to break. I guarantee this is going to happen. Right. So if you're not doing configuration deployment with drift detection, that's a huge problem. And I think that's interesting as well, where so you're just smashing config out there without any concern for if all's going to go well when you do.
Yeah, that's a good call out because yeah, configuration deployment. I would love to dig into like what that actually means when you compare it to config management with drift detection. There are probably some
So
big caveats there
yeah,
with
yeah,
configuration deployment.
absolutely. So great, we're making progress. But I think the story of this slide is that we are at the very beginning of the journey.
Very beginning. Yep. And here's just a little bit more on the next slide down here. Just it portrays it just in numeric. Sorry, just with words versus a graph. So, any comments on here, Tim? Before we move on.
Interesting that the people that don't know how automation is being used in their space is greater than the number of fully autonomous remediation. um,
Yeah.
so if you don't know how automation is being used in your organization, why are you not finding out? This is literally the future of our industry, and either you're planning to retire before that's a problem, or you just have given up on our space. I don't know. Like, why aren't you finding out? How can you possibly answer and you don't know?
Yeah, there's a cultural component here that's really interesting.
Hmm.
So yeah, and we're going to dig more into culture later on in this slide, later on this deck as
Yeah.
well.
Also, very critical component of what we look at as we look at network automation is this culture idea. Yeah.
Let's going to skip down to slide 32. What we're doing, we just talked about. How are we going about doing it? Let's talk about that now. Slide 32.
Yeah. So let's think back to that earlier slide when we saw, that hump at the very beginning stages where people were just kind of just getting started into automation. And then we saw just a very few people that were like, highly automated. And I think that perfectly aligns to this graph, which is we see the folks that are just getting started, you're probably doing some homebrew scripts or using open source apps without support, because that's probably where you start. But as you mature in your organization, you realize the critical foundation that is being laid with automation and the need for either open source with support or a commercial application that comes naturally with support, right? This idea that, hey, I shouldn't be running my production network on something that either was crafted internally or something that I don't have support for.
Yep. And oftentimes on the left-hand side there, these homebrew scripts, these are written by engineers to help make their lives easier. I have to do this thing
Yep.
15, 20 times today. Let me just automate this task and make my life easier. That's typically where it begins when it comes
Yep.
from the bottom up. And then what's also interesting is one, the role that if you look at this open source applications with paid support, 28.17%. Then you see just to the left of that, the open source applications without paid support. I think there's an evolution here from left to right. At some point, if you're in this camp here, open source applications without paid support, or definitely if you're with homebrew and scripts, you need to mature. At some point, you need to
Yep.
mature your offering, your capabilities. And that means you need to move to the right here. You need to get support for your open source applications because those are starting to play a larger role in your infrastructure, in your automation. And like we said, automation is not, it's not optional anymore. It's got to be done.
Yeah.
So you need to
It's not a
have
nice
your
to have.
protection. Yep.
Exactly. And as you move into this automated world, it is no longer something that just makes your life easier or better. It actually becomes a critical component of your production flow. And if the automation is down, it means you cannot do things. Things are actually in a broken state. And that's when you need this idea of, hey, I need support. I need a paid for product or an open source product with support.
Yep. Yeah. As you go from left to right, you're going to need paid support for your open source applications, and you're probably going to start spending more money on proprietary commercial
Yeah.
applications as well to make
And I
this
think
to make this
the point
scale.
to highlight there, Tim, good call out, right? That you are going to spend more money. What you think is more money, but something I always like to highlight is that DIY, homebrew, or just using open source is not free. It comes with a cost, and it actually comes with a very, very high cost. When you look at the problem of the maintenance of those homebrew code scripts or using open source without support, because it means you're taking on the burden of this code maintenance and system maintenance within your own organization. And it's not your skill set. You're a network engineer. You're not a software developer. You're not a systems engineer. And so taking on this additional responsibility within your organization means you're not doing your day job. So there is a cost associated with that. As well as often with the homebrew stuff, there's one person that knows the details and everybody else just consumes it. That person decides to leave the organization or they move on to a different role. And suddenly you're left holding this, like, I don't know what to do with this code. I can't update it. We have so many countless clients that have come to us here at Network to Code. They tell us this over and over, like, hey, this person left the organization. We don't know what to do with their code anymore.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a maturity. You got to move to the
Yeah.
right on the maturity
Yeah.
scale here, and this
Yeah.
this shows that there's a lot more room for a lot more firms to make that move.
Yep.
Absolutely.
As we see, and I'm surmising and I'm predicting, if you will, over time we're going to see the right side of that graph go up and the left side of that graph come down as we mature as an industry, right? We're going to see these two sides of the graph shift, I think.
Yep. And let's also take a peek at slide 33, which shows the year-over-year change. Homebrew year over year is staying fairly consistent at in the high in the 80%, 89, 80, 81, 82% as well. And the commercial applications are growing year over year, as are the OSS open source software with support. So that is growing. This shift we're talking about is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably what we see there is at the moment, because there are some gaps in the open source and commercial apps from what when I achieve with them perspective, you're probably still seeing advanced consumers using homebrew type code scripts. And I think that's probably why you see that pretty consistent with only a slight drop off, over time. And as the industry matures, along with us as the consumers of that industry, right? I think we're going to see that start to drop off more. But I think that would probably explain today why we don't see a lot of homebrew drop off just yet.
Yep. Okay, we've talked about what we're automating, how we're doing it, but what should we be doing?
Yeah,
I love
this
this
is
slide because it
what
shows us what people think they should be
yeah,
doing.
where do we think we should go next? Now, I don't know if I necessarily agree with these answers, but this is the general trend that we're seeing. People saying, "Hey, I want to automate device deployment," which I get totally. That absolutely makes sense. And then next step down, we've got the troubleshooting. Also interesting that Chris decided to call out troubleshooting on the left side of the screen, even though device deployment is actually the number one thing that people mentioned. I would love to hear Chris's thoughts on why he skipped that device deployment one, because that does make sense to me. It is a common problem of either replacing failed devices or deploying new hardware, and how do I automate that?
Yeah, it looks like here on the left side, he was calling out these as specifically having grown a lot because capacity planning is kind of down here, uh, traffic engineering. So
Yeah,
it looks like these are the high growth ones that he's calling
yeah,
out here.
yeah.
Yeah.
A couple of things I notice here as well. So we've got software upgrades at number three. Uh, I think when you think of the first two items. So if we think of this as in, hey, I need to go ask the business for budget to either hire people to help me deploy this or more bodies within my organization to deploy these and build these kinds of concepts. Device deployment, you're probably not going to get a lot of support for a budget from that. And troubleshooting, I'm guessing as well. But software upgrades, now this is an interesting story because you can tie this to your compliance and security requirements. So you can say, hey, if we get budget to automate software upgrades and software deployments, that means we can be more compliant. That means we can do more upgrades on a quarterly basis. That means when there is a vulnerability, we can patch it very quickly. I think that's a strong story to tell to your management to say, hey, we need budget to pursue this particular thing, right? That and service provisioning, those are two things that I think your management will be understanding of and be like, yes, we're going to fund that project. And as part of funding that project, you can probably start to work on the other two, the device deployment and troubleshooting.
Yep. And it's interesting. I want to talk about this troubleshooting one. This is interesting to me. I'm going to take a guess here, but when I have a BGP neighbor down scenario, if you take 20 other people, we're all probably doing the same first four steps, maybe in a different order, maybe not,
Yep.
but we're all probably doing the same four things. And I think that resonates. Every time I have to troubleshoot a BGP neighbor down, it's the same. We do the same thing every time. Can we just automate this and get rid of this toil? And if we can identify the root cause, let's identify it. And automation can help do that. And if it's not the first four things, okay, bump it up to a human and let's do some more in-depth troubleshooting. But that initial troubleshooting scenario, it's probably the same 4 or 5 steps every time. So I'm guessing that's why that's up there. It's the same thing. Interface down, BGP down. You do the same first 4 or 5 steps.
Yep. Just a quick comment. Anybody that mentioned firewall rules, just a word of caution. This is the single most complex thing to try to automate in the entire network automation stack. Don't start here. This is something you do when you're really mature in your automation journey.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. We tell customers when they ask us about this, we'll help you with that. But we also assess their maturity and we also tell them this is the most complex thing we do.
Yeah.
Are you prepared for that? It sometimes takes a little longer to show value because there's complexity involved to get it going. And let's look at our skills, Tim, our skills gap.
Yeah.
So this slide here talks about
So interesting.
the knowledge of networking knowledge and automation knowledge. And over to the right is the more expert side, and the beginner side is on the left here.
Mm.
And we see a definite trend here. I'll say it definitely among groups 4 and 5. Our more experienced network engineers are getting better at automation.
Very slowly, but we're getting there. And when I look at this and I think in 5, if I put that in colloquial terms, I think of your traditional CLI router jockey. That's the individual I imagine is putting themselves in the bucket 5. And if I look at their automation skills or how they ranked their own automation skills in bucket 5 compared to a beginner in bucket 1, they're nearly identical. This is really interesting, where someone that knows almost nothing about networking has similar automation skills as a really, really senior level router jockey. Really interesting story. Router jockeys, you're starting to get on board with this, but let's go. Let's get on board with automation. This is the future. We need you to continue to push forward in this space.
Yep.
You should have more skills than someone that has almost no network engineering capabilities whatsoever.
Yeah. And another trend here that I thought was amazing that wasn't explicitly called out, but I think is really interesting is we're seeing an evolution here right before our eyes with this data we're looking at here. If you are on, say, kind of the moderate to beginner side of the network engineering skill set, you are more familiar with automation than you are with network engineering. I think that's fascinating. I think
Yeah.
as the 2s and 3s become the 4 and 5s in, I don't know, 10 years or so, this is going to be really interesting. It's going to have an effect on how we build our networks, how we manage our networks. And if you are not automation capable in your skill set, what that means for you.
Yeah. That's I alluded to it earlier, right? Like you can think of, so say you're, up in the 4 and 5s today, and maybe your automation skills are low. Uh, Either you're going to retire in the very near future because you're that senior level and you're approaching the end of your career. But if you're not, if you're mid-career and up in this 4 and 5 bucket, you are not going to have the skills necessary to keep doing your job. You're not going to be able to get away with, but I'm the router jockey. I know the CLI. That's not going to carry you anymore. So we really, really need to focus on this culture idea of like getting on board with how to do things through code and using automation to accomplish work, to achieve your goals as a network engineer or router jockey, if we want to be colloquial.
Yeah. And one more thing here. There's been a lot of talk about how there's not as many network engineers on the younger side coming up through the pipeline. What is interesting about this data is if the network engineers that are there are really buying into automation, which it looks like they are, maybe you don't need as many network engineers.
Totally.
This is gonna transform who we hire, how many people we hire. It's going to have impacts throughout the network engineering community. Is this data in the 1s, 2s, and 3s right here? So I'm excited to see how this plays out and how this data evolves over time.
There is a shift coming, and for those that are more senior, you need to be prepared for that shift that's coming.
Yep. Tim, one last thing I wanted to talk about here is slide 58. This really resonated with me, and I think it'll resonate with you too. This statement right here: focus on people. Culture eats automation for breakfast. Personally, I've written multiple blog posts about how this is true. If the culture is not developed, if the culture is not tended to by management, all the way up to the CXO, the culture will not change and the automation effort will die. Go ahead.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more that the idea within the network space of automation is that what's been holding us back largely is culture. For sure. And as we see this trend coming, adjusting that culture, adapting that culture, growing that culture by building your team's skills and then measuring so that you can show to the business the value that's coming out of the automation and therefore then driving the people forward is so critical. And great insight here from Chris. I couldn't agree more. Everything on this slide is exactly what we see in practice with our clients on a day-to-day basis.
Yep. And I've seen automation efforts fail because this has, and I'm sure you have too, Tim, when this fails to get addressed, the automation effort will falter. And if it's not addressed at some point, it will ultimately fail. And I love that he's calling this out, because I submitted for a talk a couple years ago at the Network Automation Forum to talk about this exact thing. It's not a technical problem. Automation is a cultural problem first and foremost. Full stop. The technical part's solved.
Yeah, exactly. The technical problem is relatively easy to solve. The cultural problem is quite difficult to solve. And that's the one that we've been focusing on. And I think that's probably why we're starting to see the trend now, is that the culture is starting to shift. And so now let's embrace that. Let's level up our team skills and find ways in which we drive the business forward and show the value of automation to the business.
Yeah, very good. Tim, that wraps up our deep dive into the State of Network Automation Survey for 2025. I know I could keep talking about this for probably an hour more or so. Lots of great information there and a lot more to dive into. Thanks for joining us. Tim?
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening in. Hopefully you found something of value out of there, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Yeah, and please comment below if you heard something you like or didn't like, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks.